Hi, welcome back to What Did You Learn? I'm Ahava Leibtag. I'm excited to have here with me today a longtime colleague, Danny Fell, who is the Senior Strategist at Optum. Danny just shared with me that he has more than 30 years of experience in the healthcare marketing field. In fact, his first internship was in a healthcare marketing department while he was still in college. So Danny, welcome. Thanks so much.
Hi, great to be here.
Yeah. So everybody wants to know how you've been spending your time during the pandemic. Looks like you have a lovely office, but have you been able to get out and pursue any hobbies or do anything fun?
So I have been with my teenage daughter building a stamp collection. So I think on the nerd scale, that's somewhere between making your own bread and learning to crochet. Sorry if I offended anybody who crochets. So that's one thing. And cooking. We do a lot of cooking in our house.
That's awesome. So we're a year into this. It's a year.
Yeah.
If somebody had come to you in February of 2020 and said, Danny, here's what's going to happen, what do you wish you had known or prepared for?
Wow. So actually, what I wish I had done way back in college was pursued my microbiology. I actually have an undergraduate in microbiology. So virology was one of my favorite classes. I was hugely fascinated with that and have for many years read like Richard Preston's books, The Hot Zone and others about the Ebola virus, and have a very good friend who was communications director at the CDC. And we used to talk about this happening. He was convinced this type of thing was just going to happen. He presented at Shishmid one year. I wish I had a recording of it. Bob Howard is his name. Amazing communications guy. And he said, look, we're going to have a pandemic like this where we don't have a vaccine. And sure enough, that happened. What I wish, I think understanding how hard it would be to convince people, consumers, that this was real, that this is something to be concerned about, that there wasn't a secret plot here to hold people back, but we were actually trying to help save lives and keep people healthy. I think that particular aspect of it really, as a marketer and as someone who does consumer research, really understanding that dynamic, I think I just sort of assume, wow, people will hunker down, people will wear a mask, people will follow the guidelines of their the healthcare leaders in the country, and that didn't happen. And I think that really opened my eyes to sort of the challenges that we have going forward, and that many places around the world do.
What I wish I had known is about the infodemic. I wish that I had understood exactly what you just said about how the polarization of the American people has led to two completely different understandings of what's happening with this pandemic. It's just unbelievable. You talk to people who think like, it's not that big a deal. They're trying to shut down the economy. They have all these excuses of why this can't be real. And then all of a sudden it's like, somebody they know gets it or dies from it, and all of a sudden their eyes are opened. So in terms of thinking about healthcare marketing for the future, how do you think we combat the fact that there are two realities going on right now, or two perceptions of reality? I should say there's only one reality, but two
Maybe.
Right, exactly. In postmodernism.
Maybe we'll find out there isn't.
Right, exactly. We're living in two parallel universes. How do healthcare marketers approach that, and how do they make sure they're protecting their brand at the same time?
Yeah, great question. So I think we have to meet people where they are, right? So take the current issue on the table, which is vaccine acceptance or vaccine hesitancy, right? That existed prior to COVID, prior to other issues. I think maybe 50% of the public actually gets an influenza vaccine every year for whatever reason. But I don't think we can assume that it's purely political or purely demographic or purely socioeconomic issues. I think we just have to meet people where they are. I do think coming out of this that the industry and hospitals and health systems are going to have, as well as pharmaceutical companies and others, are going to have a bigger challenge ahead in public health, but also they're going to have much more what I think of as brand equity. So if you think of kind of the traditional putting equity in the bank, and when good things happen, you build that equity, and when there's negative things, you withdraw that equity. I think we're building up a lot of equity that will pay off long term. And I think that's how marketers and communicators should be thinking about this is, yeah, the day to day, the setbacks week to week are hugely frustrating and stressful, but overall you're getting compounding interest. I like finance. You're getting compound interest in your brand equity if you continue to try to meet people where they are, and that will pay off over time.
So going back to meeting people where they are, at the same time that this pandemic was raging, all of a sudden the social justice movement with Black Lives Matter, and now we're seeing it, sort of in the Asian American culture, sort of this true, sort of let's educate people about what it really feels like to be a minority in this country, and let's start talking about this. How do brands meet people where they are about something like that when typically they're in a geographical location or they are afraid to touch that topic for whatever reason?
Yeah, so I think you've kind of hit on something that obviously is super relevant, super timely, and super important. But I think in your own question is somewhat of the answer, right? Historically, prior to the last year or so, brands have shied away. Some brands, right? Not all. Fashion industry brands, entertainment brands have been maybe leaning into, technology brands have been leaning into these issues for many, many years, but other industry brands and maybe what we think of as more traditional brands, broader consumer focus, whatever, haven't. And I think that has changed and is changing. And I think you're seeing more brands being willing to lean into and talk about these issues, raise the importance of them. They're not single issues; they're interconnected. They touch on diversity in the workplace, how we get along with people, respect, socioeconomic issues in healthcare, its disparities. So I don't think we are necessarily isolating or should isolate these to sort of one thing, one solution. That's good, but also as you look at these issues and realize how complex and interconnected they are, it is going to take more resource, more work, more effort.
What I'm worried about is that when the pressure from the pandemic pulls back and when people get used to the idea of Black Lives Matter or diversity matters, it's just going to become another thing. And then it's not going to get the attention that it needs in order for real change to happen. So the board of directors is great, but how far down does that trickle back? And in your experience, since being an intern in that hospital marketing department, have you also experienced this sort of, we're going one way, now we're going back?
Yeah, sure. I think you could easily validate that. Like if you just looked over the last 10 years and said, look, we've had this heightened awareness and media attention on an issue like racial divide or gender equality or diversity in the workplace. And then things don't seem to materially change, right? And I'm not an expert on those issues by any means, but I do personally, professionally think that we are entering a different period in culture and business when things are potentially aligned to change much more. So to your point, yes, the signals I see are from the top, leadership, board, stakeholders embracing and taking this more seriously and leading on these issues. And then to your question or point about from the bottom up, I think it's a generational change. I think it's the people who are coming in. I have two teenagers and they will be entering the workforce sometime in the next 5-10 years. And so they're going to have a very, thank God, yeah. They're going to have a very different, I know, because I know that generation, and I think they're going to have a very different perspective on how things should be. And so to me, if we can get sort of going from the top and coming from the bottom, that's when you affect real change.
So this is a real paradigm shift. Yeah, I think you're right. I really do. I want to shift a little bit to the whole mental health issue. So
Yep.
I think you've got 8 billion people who are going to have PTSD. I just don't think that there's any way around that. How can healthcare marketers sort of lead extra support for people at this point, really looking at the service lines of business and how to not just, think about how are we going to get more patients, but how are we going to be leaders in this field? Is there opportunity there for us? Should we go back to focusing on cancer and heart, which we're going to do anyway? But do you think that there's an opportunity for hospitals to really sort of lead that way?
I think that's a great question. I look at mental health services kind of in the way that post-acute care has been seen in the past, right? It was sort of peripheral to the acute care and the tertiary, advanced medicine we do, and the primary care business. Oh yeah, we have post-acute over here, we have behavioral over here, and we have some other kind of ancillary things. I think that's changing. I think we are also going to see a pretty big paradigm shift from the hospital-centric inpatient acute care to now, the first move of that was to ambulatory care, right? When hospitals, I think it was don't quote me on this, maybe 2016, 2017, when hospital revenues actually flipped from being majority inpatient to majority outpatient.
Right.
So that was sort of the first move. The second move, the second wave of that is into the home. That I think coming out of this, we're going to really see this concept of you don't need to come into any kind of practice. We can treat you from home for a lot of things. I think the vast majority of telehealth visits, you would probably know, Ahava, is mental health related. So that speaks volumes about not only the importance of it, but also the application of telehealth for that. So I think there's some really interesting things happening here. And again, going back to the talk I gave yesterday, it was, are you just going to sort of go back to what your marketing plan and your marketing roadmap was a year ago before this started, like nothing happened? Or are you going to use this time to radically rethink what marketing should be in your organization and what you want it to be in terms of leading the organization going forward?
In 18 months from now, we're at a conference and we're having a drink. And you say to me, what, Ahava, the one thing that I had in my toolbox, but I never really used that much, but I took out and sharpened during the pandemic, and now I'll never let it go in my practice. What would that be?
Wow, that's a thoughtful question. Yeah, I would have to say, first of all, I've been tremendously blessed, probably because I've been in this space for so long, but to have a great network of colleagues and professionals who do similar things. And I would have to say that networking has been tremendously helpful to me on two levels. One is simply keeping track of what is going on and who's doing what, and that sharing that was happening, especially in the very early stages of the pandemic. I mean, it was just amazing. The marketing communications professionals who were essentially saying, I just created this kit of X. Here, take it and use it in your market. Here, I'm a vendor, you can have this for free, literally, right? And so that was hugely motivating for me. And it was also personally rewarding because that connectivity was super important. And I made that point yesterday on the webinar with the healthcare marketing group who are doing essentially a lunch and learn once a month. I said, this is hugely important to that emotional health and well-being of your members, because you're giving them an outlet, a platform. And so even if they dial in once or stay for a little bit, I think it's going to be helpful to them. So yeah, that networking and all that it entails, I think for me has been the biggest kind of, I've always realized it was important, but I think in times of crisis and in times of real change, that's super important.
Danny, thank you so much. How can people find you?
So they can email me at Optum. It's Fell, my last name with an S on the end, at optum.com. They can follow me on Twitter, where I tend to stay mostly in the realm of marketing, communication, interesting things in the marketing industry, and that's at Dan Fell. And I welcome folks reaching out, like to help when I can and point people to other professionals like you. And just really appreciate the time that we had today.
Of course. And that is really true. I have gone to Danny for help before and he has been it. So thank you so much for being here, Danny. I really appreciate it. And I know my audience does as well.
Thanks, Ahava. It was great to be with you.
Thank you.